This is a pivotal and transformational moment for the automotive industry as it seeks to decarbonise and establish new supply chains for zero-emission vehicles.
It is important that we collectively work together to become the leading provider globally of sustainable engineering solutions.
I think for the aftermarket in the UK, it's an evolution, and we predominantly see vehicles from kind of 3-4 years onwards.
With the right incentives and government support in place now, today, the UK can continue to be global leaders in innovative, lightweight engineering and manufacturing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Justin and Chris. It's great to be with you for the opening panel today. So we're joined by a real cross-section of the industry. So from component parts to vehicle production with Helen, to the commercial vehicle sector with Simon, and to the aftermarket distribution of parts with Andy. And what we're going to do is really get a sentiment check from each of these business leaders and industrialists, and then test it with Joe without making it too much of a therapy session. It's interesting whenever this industry is in a period of challenge that it tends to reach for aviation metaphors. So even last night in the speech we heard about headwinds, we invariably hear about turbulence, hard landings, re-engineering the plane in flight. And I think that is a real metaphor for the point of transition we're at. And even Mike mentioned Concorde in his opening remarks, which kind of proved the point. But what we're going to do today is really take the industry in order, starting with component parts, and talk about this point of turbulence. 100 years ago, when I was a journalist at the FT, if I had to explain a story, the editor always said, keep it short. So I'm going to ask the panelists to keep their responses short and succinct as well. So let's start with turbulence and the headwinds that I just spoke about. And we've had Brexit, clearly. We are still seeing the after effects of the pandemic. We've all heard about the supply chain shortages when it comes to chips, let alone the impact of the war in Europe. And with this industry, oddly, Ukraine representing such a large part of electrical harnesses for the industry. And then on top of that, we've had the domestic, political and macroeconomic uncertainties, which Chris alluded to in his section. So with that setup, I want to really start with Grant at the component end of the sector, the very beginning of the industry, if you like, to say, is this point of transition a moment of optimism, or should we still be pessimistic about the outlook?
For us, I think it is definitely an opportunist moment. We are a stamper, for those of you who don't know that. And I mentioned recently that what we want to do, we want to transition from being a stamper to a provider of sustainable engineering solutions for the customer. So that, I think, is key for us going forward. And with all of the opportunities, I mean, we're in an industrial revolution. So it's to take advantage of that.
And your company produces millions of parts a day.
Yep.
And is the nature of the orders and the time frame against which customers are expecting them, how is that changing?
The semiconductor impact on most businesses in the supply chain was catastrophic for all of the people that work for us. So you had a stop-start situation. I have to say, and hearing a couple of speakers earlier, it's true to say that we've now got a more stable supply situation. So that is definitely a benefit now going forward.
And Helen, are you seeing that in the manufacturing end of it, receiving those component parts? Are you seeing things stabilise and get better?
Well, we're a small volume manufacturer, you know, we're not like mass market, and we always have to work in partnership with our supply chain, and that hasn't diminished, that's just strengthened. I think what we see from a sales perspective, certainly demand for our products is still very strong. We launched the 750S in April, order bank's full for this year, well into next year as well, so they're positive signs.
And it's very interesting you say it's not a demand problem that the industry is facing. In fact, it's a supply problem in getting all the parts you need for the vehicles you want to produce. And Simon, I was struck when we spoke last night, you said the same, that the demand is outstripping supply for what Volvo is doing in commercial vehicles. And interestingly, demand for diesel is harder to fulfill than for electric vehicles. Just explain that a bit.
Yeah, so we're seeing, you described it, I think, as a nightmare on the chip shortage. We're seeing issues across the component supply. So it was chips, but it moves around, it's different things. So last week we had an issue with paint. We couldn't get parts painted. We solved that issue, and now we have a problem finding painters. So every time we solve one, we get the next one. And I think, I sense it is getting better, and it's good to hear that sort of further down the supply chain, it's a brighter picture. But we're not quite seeing it yet. We sense it's coming, but we're not there. But it is a huge problem. I mean, we are very much supply constrained. We could sell far more trucks than we can build at the moment. And the other thing we are doing, which is awfully inefficient, is we're building partial vehicles. So around our factory in Ghent at the moment, there are parked 3,000 incomplete trucks. And that sort of thing cannot continue. Think the amount of capital tied up, just parked in between trees, along the road, anywhere we can put them. It can't continue like this.
So you have an inventory squeeze.
Huge, yeah.
And is that coming in the aftermarket segment as well? Is there an inventory problem?
I think, as Chris's graph alluded to from a services perspective, I think we've kind of got a new baseline, but the new baseline is considerably lower than the pre-pandemic position. Supply chain, I think, has stabilised, meeting the expectations of that lower baseline. But we're seeing less miles travelled, we're seeing less journeys, and that is elongating the kind of replacement cycle needs of the consumer. So I think we're kind of meeting a new norm. What's interesting though, so you've got workshops, independent workshops from a servicing perspective, but we've also got on the crash repair, the body shops, and I think they're seeing the similar challenges on supply because they are waiting for new OE replacement parts. A lot of those aren't available, and the key-to-key time on crash repair is significantly extended, which is impacting then all the way down through the value chain and ultimately costing more in insurance replacements as well.
So right across the value chain, from everything you've said, is that the industry could do much better, could fulfill many more orders if only it could resolve some of these supply chain issues. Is that the bottom line?
Yes.
So, Joe, what comfort can government give that this supply chain issue can be addressed and managed in such a way that can enable companies to meet the demand curve?
I mean, this is an absolutely seismic time for the sector. I'm going to go slightly off topic for a minute. We've been working with the sector, they're transitioning and decarbonising and facing a huge technological change, a once in a generation. And unfortunately, they're doing this against the headwinds that we're talking about. So on the back of the pandemic, inflation, economic shocks, supply chain shocks. So we are working very hard with the industry to try and overcome these barriers. In terms of supply chains, we are looking at things like, I suspect this will get us, and I know this is an issue on the industry's mind, issues around rules of origin. This is something we're prioritising and we're working with the Commission to resolve. So we're looking to see where those blockers are and where government has a role in helping to resolve those.
And are you optimistic that the rules of origin issue will be resolved?
We're certainly working towards resolving that. It affects everybody in the supply chain, affects the UK, but also our trading partners in Europe. So we're working together to resolve that as a priority. In terms of general optimism, I think we've heard about optimism. There are a lot of challenges. I think I'm realistically optimistic for the sector. There is a huge amount of potential. Yes, there's huge challenges to face, but there's a huge amount of potential. We have got a really excellent heritage to build on, and so much know-how and a really strong R&D base. That's one thing I continually hear. And in my previous role as head of chemicals, one thing we come back to is our potential in technology and our R&D. So I think we have a very good sound base to continue to build on while we get through these challenges and help the sector transition.
So we're in this unusual position, which is usually sequential, but now it's converged of having structural, cyclical, and regulatory transition all happening at the same time. And then you take that together with what Chris said about the economic outlook. If that's where we are today, where do each of the panelists think we're going? What is the outlook and the guidance that you're giving about how you can not only address these issues, but achieve growth given these challenges? So Grant, again, starting with you in the order of the industry.
Okay, well, for us, I mentioned that we don't just want to be a stamper. The opportunity for us is to put our engineering, because we're engineers, to put an engineering bias on it in terms of going up the food chain, really, increasing the value add, becoming for our customers, somebody that can solve the engineering problems. And I think it's very similar to what happened in 2008 for us as a business during the banking crisis. What really enabled Sertec to drive out of that was partnering with our customers on lightweight technology, and I see that with the EV side of it now.
And I know, Helen, lightweight technology is a particular DNA of McLaren, but battery electric vehicles poses a challenge to that as well. Can you just explain about that complexity?
Yes, certainly. So McLaren, our products are all about performance, innovation, agility. That's core to McLaren DNA. Battery electric vehicles are inherently far heavier than their ICE counterparts, anything from 40 to 30%. So that represents a huge challenge when you're looking at lightweight supercars. The rest of the market, the mass market, they've made great strides when we're looking at battery technology and adapting that car park. But you can't just pick up a Tesla battery and put it into a McLaren. That's not going to work. We're looking at a part of the battery ecosystem, the high density part of that battery. That's really important for us, because for McLaren to make a battery electric vehicle, it's got to outperform an ICE. That's what our customers would demand.
And Chris, Simon, in your segment, battery electric vehicles and what Helen was talking about, a broader ecology or ecosystem, where do you see the mix evolving in CVs?
Well, I think within Volvo, we foresee the future being 40-50% battery, 40-50% fuel cell, and a hardcore of very intense usages where you need internal combustion, whether that's hydrogen or HVO or some other fuel. In the UK, that internal combustion bit is taken away by the regulations. We're zero means zero, which I think is a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. But for us, we see in terms of the sort of economic outlook, as long as the economy remains sort of flat, as long as we avoid recession, the truck industry will be okay, because we have this pent-up demand. We've been supply constrained for a number of years now. So actually there is a build-up that will carry us through. But having said that, we're GDP driven. So if GDP takes a tumble, if we have a recession, we will suffer. And we will survive. We're used to being a cyclical business. But what it will do is put back the transition. We're desperately trying to invest to help ourselves and our customers convert to zero carbon, and that will be put back years if we have a recession.
And in aftermarket parts, electrification, how is that changing your business model as well?
Yeah, I mean, from an EV perspective in the UK, it's certainly an evolution, not a revolution. It's going to take a long time. We've got a growing vehicle park, we've got an aging vehicle park, and although the kind of hybrid and the electric vehicle penetration is growing year on year, I think it's probably followed the technology curve. We've got the early adopters. I think there needs to be substantial further investment in the whole infrastructure to see any sort of real continued growth in that movement. So for the aftermarket, it's quite interesting. The aftermarket looks after probably 70% of the vehicles in the UK, so all the drivers and consumers. And we are the laggards behind the new technologies as they come through. We've got to not only continue to ensure that the independent markets can service and maintain the existing vehicle park, but obviously prepare for those changes in the new technologies. And government legislation is essential with that as well, not only from the investment, but also making sure that from a right to repair, from an access to data and access to those parts and services, that's critical as well.
And Joe, I mean, this reality check that we're hearing from these four leaders, what comfort can you give that the government gets it and that there is a legislative programme, especially heading potentially into an election year, that will give practical support to the industry?
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, I shall, as an official, I will park the election piece. But I think, having listened to these points, I think, you know, government takes the sector very seriously. And recognises the huge both economic and technological contribution it makes, and also the sustainability contribution it does and can make. So the government has been taking various actions. Firstly, we've talked about stability and certainty. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has put in a lot of effort to create market stability with the autumn statement last year, taking that through the budget and heading into this year's autumn statement. And I was struck by Chris Giles's points about what is the UK good at. In that autumn statement last year, the Chancellor set out his priorities for manufacturing and is looking at 5 areas, and one of those is advanced manufacturing, and focusing on aero and auto as huge contributors to advanced manufacturing because of the contribution they make to the economy. So putting in place that stability. The other areas where government is working is the regulatory framework. There is a change, there's new regulation needed as we move into electrification. That's as much a challenge for government to get it right as it is for industry. But that will help, again, provide stability and that framework for industry to work to. My colleagues in the Department for Transport, as many of you will know in this room, are working on the zero-emission vehicle mandate, which is the regulatory framework to phase out petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030, and then by 2035 to have all cars and vans to be zero emission. And they're setting that trajectory to work towards those 2 goals, and their consultation has just closed on that. I know that many of you will have contributed to that, and so we're working with our colleagues to see what the shape of that will be later this year, and I know that everybody is waiting to see what that will look like, and again, that is another priority for us. So there's the economic stability and monetary policy for the UK, there's the regulatory framework. And then what my department, I'm head of the automotive sector in the Department for Business and Trade, what we're doing is we work with the sector, we engage with you through things like the Automotive Council. That is a really valuable source of engagement and information, and also understanding what the issues are and where we need to take action. We've done a huge amount of work with that. It's co-chaired by a minister, so that's a way of getting industry views in. We are also providing support to help establish those new supply chains that we've talked about for electric vehicles. So we work with the Advanced Propulsion Centre. That's been going for 10 years now, very successfully, has really helped move the dial in terms of encouraging that R&D and helping to commercialise it. We also have the Automotive Transformation Fund, where multi-million pound fund, again, to help establish those supply chains, especially in the areas of batteries. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, it's been difficult, but making a transformation on this scale and with those headwinds we've talked about isn't easy. And I think, we are also looking outward. We are looking very hard at our response to the US Inflation Reduction Act and the EU's response to that. We've talked about our economy. We can't compete with those sums that the US is offering, but at the same time, we are working to provide longer term certainty. There is support available, not just through the APC and the ATF, but also things like the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund.
So in short, the government gets it.
Yes.
Hears the pain.
Yes.
Knows the challenge.
Yes.
And is going to be a collaborative partner in achieving the solutions.
That is our aim. And I think one of the things that illustrates that, at the beginning of the year, we had, 2 secretaries of state, 3 secretaries of state. We now have the machinery of government change was the PM's response to say, we take these challenges very seriously, so I need separate departments to work on energy and net zero, science and technology, business and trade, and we're working on all of those things with our colleagues in Department of Transport. And
we've talked a lot about supply chain shortages, difficulty in accessing components, the electricity and technology challenge. Let's talk about briefly the supply chain of people and skills. And one of the challenges, not just in this industry, but in many others, is skills shortages. So again, going very quickly through the value chain of guests we've got here. Andy, what's your view?
From the aftermarket, if I look to the aftermarket, we have 175,000 technicians in the UK. Currently, there's 23,000 vacancies. And when you then look at the capabilities of that group, are they ready for the technologies that's coming through? No, not yet. ADAS, we have around 3,000 technicians in the UK trained for ADAS. Within the next 7 years, we need 106,000. EV, hybrid, it's the same challenges. And is the infrastructure, is the government subsidies, is the apprenticeship levies, all the schemes, are they really there to support building that capability and making sure that we can actually service and provide those services to the consumer and to the driver?
Thank you. And then again, going in reverse order slightly, Simon, do you have the people you need to fulfill the demand you could supply?
No, we have exactly the same problem. The technician shortage is well known. The driver shortage in our customers' business is well known. There are things we need to do. We have an image problem. The image of a technician in greasy overalls and a big spanner is history, but it's still perceived that way. And diversity is an issue. I'm slightly concerned saying that in this room with, we have an ageing male workforce and we need to change that. We at Volvo are working very hard to make sure that all of our sites have full technician facilities for female technicians. Even if we don't have them, we're putting it in place because that's what we have to do. We've got to move to help ourselves. Just briefly on the apprenticeship scheme, totally agree. It's a fantastic idea. It's a fantastic scheme, but the amount of funding allowed for technician training is not enough. We used to have 100 colleges plus delivering technician training. There's less than 40 now, and it's reducing every day because they can't make it work on the funding available. So that is something I'd really ask you to look at. That needs to change.
And I imagine there's no shortage of people applying to McLaren to work in your company. But are you seeing the same squeeze on skills?
There's a real competition for skills out there, absolutely. And in the short term, we're competing with many different industries that are far sexier than automotive even, when you're looking at software engineers, for example. So there's a real short-term issue, and we have to look elsewhere outside the UK for those immediate skill shortages. There is a lot we can do as an industry to make it more attractive, as the panelists have already alluded to. Diversity inclusion is a big part of that. You know, we need to be able to attract the right people to reflect the customer base that we're dealing with. The Auto Council D&I charter that the industry signed up to towards the end of last year is a great step forward there. So we need to do a lot about, you know, shouting about the industry and shouting about what we're trying to do to make it more attractive. I also think that, you know, we very much look to engage with the younger generation, you know, and we can do that with the brand power that we have with McLaren. So we do a lot of outreach to schools, getting, you know, primary schools, secondary schools, colleges, you know, getting people interested in what we're doing. We're a really innovative part of the industry, and that's exciting. But also looking globally, you know, McLaren work with Plan International, and it's not just about engaging, you know, young children in STEM and also females in particular, but also getting the parents. That's a real important part of it as well.
And Grant, how is it impacting your business?
I have to say we're not having the same issues in terms of attracting people that we were. There's been a lot of talent planning for the future through succession planning. We set a training centre up at our HQ, and like yourselves, we're working with schools and universities. So we're just feeling a very different spot at the moment to where we were. I suppose learnt from some of the past issues that we've had, really.
And Joe, so this is a very real problem for this industry and others. Briefly, how can the government help ease the squeeze?
Well, there are several things that are already underway. I mean, I've been impressed with some of the things I've seen on my visits to industry through things like apprenticeship training programs and outreach to schools and things. Where the government is helping, colleagues in the Department for Education have established a unit for future skills, particularly important in this sector as it moves away from more traditional mechanical engineering towards software development and electrical engineering. And also colleagues at Innovate UK are working with the Institute for Apprentices and Technical Education to start to future-proof the technical education system. So again, there's things coming through the pipeline.
Thank you. So we've got a few minutes now. I just want to test some of what we've heard. There's a reality check from industry, some comfort from government, but I want to test whether anyone in the audience empathises with what they've heard or they take a contradictory view. So we have some mics if anyone would like to ask a question of the audience, from the audience. Anyone? Well, maybe I'll just ask a supplementary question then. So taking all these pieces together, Joe, do you think that the UK should reassure the industry that the competitive nature of what the UK offers is going to be protected and supported by government in this next election cycle?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the auto sector has got a hugely proud heritage in the UK. It's a big part of our manufacturing. As I said, has a really vibrant contribution to research and development and commercialising that. And I think what we are working with the industry now is to build on that, to take it forward to the next level as we decarbonise and electrify. So there's real potential there. Yes, there are huge challenges and there are huge risks as well. And you know, we have come up against issues that have had to be resolved, and at the same time we have huge economic challenges. So absolutely, the UK has a great future for automotive manufacturing. We've also had some really excellent investment from both incumbent OEMs and also new startups. Picking some examples, we've had, you know, Nissan and Envision have invested 1 billion to build the electric vehicle hub in Sunderland. That's just one example. We've had investment from McLaren and others in the room, 380 million from Foord. So there are some real good news stories here.
So if, very briefly, one ask each of government, what would it be, Grant?
Go for it.
It's got to be incentives for investment.
Great. Helen?
Oh, one, you're really restricting me. I've got a list. I would just say, building on what Chris said, the UK needs to remember what they're good at, and we have some great innovative companies there. They might not be the biggest one, might not be in the biggest volume, but we're adding great value.
Simon?
We've not talked about it enough, but the transition to zero carbon transport is the biggest issue on the table for us at the moment. And what we really need from government is a plan, and a plan that is well communicated. It's not good enough to say we're going to invest in infrastructure. What our customers need is, where is that going to be? When is it going to be available? What's the charge going to be? We need to get into detail. These are operational people that will not buy based on a general promise. They need detail.
And Andy?
I think ultimately we've got to remember the consumer, the driver, the voter, and this is about mobility and keeping people mobile and the ability to stay mobile, to be able to afford it, and to sustain and preserve an automotive industry that can keep that running at an affordable cost.
Thank you. Well, many of these questions I'm sure will be put to the Secretary of State in the next session. I want to say thank you very much to our opening panellists.